All right, so let's get into some of the mechanical tools that we need to make sure that we have if we're going to be doing chiller service, especially repair side service. So, at a bare minimum, if you're going to get into just doing troubleshooting, then you need the hand tools and you need the service bag that I talked about in the hand tools lesson. But if you're going to get into actually doing repairs on screws and centrifugals, and you're going to get into the in-depth mechanics of these systems and cooling towers and such, then you're going to need a lot of what is here and what we're going to be talking about to be successful and to do it correctly. So let's just kind of work through our table here. One of the biggest ones I'm going to start with is having proper socket sets. Okay, we're talking from 1/4 inch up to 1 1/8 at a minimum. Okay, a lot, especially like our chill water piping. We're using 1 1/8 on a lot of those bolts. Now they also sometimes get larger than that, but for the standard pipe and size of system, 1 1/8 is very, very typical. So having an 1 1/8 socket set, and I recommend having it a set deep socket and shallow socket. Okay, so this you could consider a deep socket, as well as with this set here. So these are all deep sockets, and then this would be a shallow socket. Okay, so we've got both here. Also, be cautious when you're getting these if you're going to use them in an impact. All right, so this would be a large impact. For example, you need impact rated sockets. If you're not careful and you get a standard socket that is not impact rated, they do shatter and break, and that could create a very bad day for yourself depending on what circumstance you're in. So just be aware of that. If you're not going to be using it on an impact, then just a standard socket is probably going to be fine, especially if all you're going to be using is a breaker bar. Anyway, yes, so my recommendation is having a set of, especially those smaller sizes, can be a 3/8 drive, which is perfectly fine. That's going to be your standard ratchet that we're probably the most used to, these here. All right, so having 3/8 drives is going to be handy, but I do recommend having your larger stuff in 1/2 inch. So have a full 1/2 inch drive set, especially for your larger sizes. And by larger sizes, I'm saying probably, I don't know, at least 3/4 and up. If you're gonna have, if you're just trying to go bare minimums here, okay, and for budget or whatever your circumstances are, then at least anything 3/4 in size and larger, try to have a set in a 1/2 inch drive. These 3/8 drives don't have the torque capacity that we need a lot of the time to get those larger bolts, especially if you're going to invest in any kind of an impact gun like this. Then these are going to come either 1/2 inch or 3/4. So that's also where having reducers, even if some of the drives and stuff you have are 3/4, reducers are a useful thing to have if you're trying to just go kind of one size fit a lot. Not fit all, but fit a lot. So, like I said, have a full set 1 1/8 shallow and deep socket. At minimum, have your larger sockets in a 1/2 inch drive at a minimum. And you also want to pay attention to having a 6-point or 12-point socket. So the difference there is this is a 6-point socket. This is specifically used on chill water piping. But I have some sockets here like this one. This is a 12-point. Now, depending on the circumstances and what torque ratings we're operating at, depends on which way we need to make sure we go. Okay, so if you've got a low torque bolt and you're having trouble getting into it for some reason, a 12-point, because it has more internal points to slip on there, may be useful in that circumstance. But if you're having to do a high torque and you're having to put a lot of foot-pounds on that bolt to secure it, then you really want a 6-point, because it's not going to strip out, and it's also not going to risk stripping the bolt head out as much. It's one of the downsides to a 12-point. They naturally just end up stripping the hex head of your bolts a lot easier. Now, there are some, whether we're doing teardowns on centrifugals, depending on what you're working on, there are some systems where they use 12-point sockets, okay, or bolt heads. specifically. So you're going to need a 12 point to fit on those if that is the case. One simple one you'll routinely come across that comes to mind is the D-housing cover on a YK centrifugal chiller. Those are 12 point bolts on there. So if you're going to take that cover off for the D-housing to do any work in there, you're going to need a 12 point socket to do that. Please don't try to use crescent wrenches and stuff on, or not crescent, but Allen wrenches on that stuff. Anyway, having a quality socket set and ratchet drivers is going to be important to build and grow on that. Having a good breaker bar is also going to be really important. There's going to be times where, one, using the impact isn't the best solution. At the same time, a ratchet like this won't cut it. There again, having a, now this is a large one, but here, more proper comparative. The crescent or the regular open end wrench also isn't going to cut it either. So we can have a breaker bar. Now this particular one is an extending one. So I really like these as kind of a multi-fit in that way. One of the downsides is I don't have the same torque rating on this one that I could if I just had a straight solid bar. So again, depending on what your circumstances are, what you need your tool to do, just those are some things to keep in mind. For me, this has worked really well, and I haven't really had any issues with it so far. I've come close. I thought I was going to break it a few different times, but I didn't. All right, so a breaker bar, having extensions for your sockets. These are important things to have in your kit. This is a half-inch, 12 half-inch drive. Okay, so this is the part that your ratchet or impact goes into as your drive. It's a 12-inch in its length. Okay, so having good extensions is really going to make your life easier, and it's going to be required in some cases. You're just not going to be able to get anything else in there. Having a set of knuckle joints. Okay, so this is an impact rated heavy duty knuckle joint half-inch drive. This is a non-impact rated, not heavy duty knuckle joint half-inch drive. I had to buy this one when I tore this one up. I still have this one. I don't know why, but I still have it. So either way, have a set of knuckle joints. There's going to be situations where you just, because of the pipe insulation or whatever the case may be, it's really hard to get lined up in there. Even with extensions, you can throw a knuckle on there and you're going to be good to go. It's going to help you a lot. On a lot of these sockets in specific sizes, like I said, as long as you get your kits up to 1 1/8 inch, and it doesn't mean like, so for this kit, as an example, this is a quarter to, let me look here. I think this is a 1/4 inch. No, 3/8 to 1 inch kit. Okay, these are good kits to have. This has served me really well, but it doesn't have 1 1/8 inch. So sometimes, like for me, it made more sense. I bought this 3/8 to 1 inch kit, and then I would just buy a 1 1/8 inch independently, and it's just a separate socket on its own. I've got a couple of those in there. So just how you can kind of mix match and build the kit that you need. Don't think that you have to find a complete kit that includes 1 1/8 inch, because that may be, one, difficult. Two, you might be a lot more expensive trying to find that kit versus a more, say, budget friendly kit with just buying the specific one you need. Now, as part of how I've done a lot of this stuff, I start with the basic kits and then I grow from there. So as an example, this is a 3/4 inch Allen or hex head wrench. So this is on a 1/2 inch drive. I bought this because, I've had this for a lot of years. I was, at the time, it was pretty common to run into 06N screw compressors. A lot of those have been replaced nowadays. There's not that many left in the market in my area. But these were very, very common. And so to do a oil filter change on that compressor, you needed this socket. So hence, that's why I have it. I got to where I started doing oil changes or oil filter changes and servicing on 06Ns. This is my early days getting into screws. and I have a socket dedicated just to that. It's the only thing I've ever had to use it for in my entire career, but it's here and I have it. So you'll have a lot of tools like that. If you have machines that you're going to be routinely working on, you're just going to have to sometimes invest in that specific thing, and then just over time build your kit out. Don't try to have everything up front at once. Start with what you're seeing on a daily basis. Continuing forward, having mallets. Okay, we have to hit a lot of things and we don't want to break them. Compressor housings, as an example, and I'm not recommending, it's routine for us to have to hammer on a compressor housing, but sometimes, especially if we're maybe playing with some slides or something, we just need to give some things some love taps. Okay, if you use a solid hammer, you can crack the metal housing if you're not careful. So having a mallet like this that can transfer a lot of that energy without being so like pinpointed with the impact that it literally cracks the housing and ruins the compressor, mallets are a really good way to go with that. So if you're trying to hit things and you don't want to break them, but you need to apply some force to them, have a good set of mallets. I've got a couple of them here. These were just kind of my go-tos. A lot of this stuff you don't have to spend a ton of money on, especially like these mallets. They tear up all the time. They get all kinds of messed up. So just having something that when you tear up the rubber, you can just chunk it and move on. It's not going to be a big deal. Breaker bars. Or, I'm sorry, not breaker, pry bars. Pry bars are a huge part of our kits, having a few different sizes and types. So this is I don't know, 36 inch or 24. It's not 24. Either way, having a big pry bar, and then I also carry some little smaller ones. Okay, these are really good, especially if you're trying to position compressors around. You're trying to maybe pick them up slightly to get a skid plate under them, things of that nature. Pry bars are really useful for that. Or if you're trying to maybe work on a tower fan adjustment, and you need to just kind of shift it over a little bit. You can loosen your mounting bolts off, use a little bit of a pry bar, shift those things where you need them, and you're good to go. So yes, having a good set of pry bars is a important part of our kit that I highly recommend. Having a good set of brushes. So this is just a wire metal brush. Be mindful of the type of metal that you have. So depending on what surface you're trying to clean, you want to make sure that you have I personally try to match the brush to that surface. So if I have a stainless steel metal I'm trying to scrub, I try to have some stainless steel brushes. This particular one is a brass. This is a brass brush that's really need to go. It goes in the trash at this point. But either way, so if I was doing brass fittings, I would use that brush, so forth and so forth. So pay attention to the type of metal and the type of metal of the brush itself. Having a scraper tool. This is just a paint scraper, but when you're trying to clean gasket surfaces, well, this could be just doing a suction gasket on a screw compressor, okay? It's important to be able to scrape and clean those surfaces very, very well. We need to make sure that they're very clean. Now, you can also take a wire brush on the end of a drill, and you can brush those a lot of the time. But again, you want to be careful with that, and you want to be careful with the type of brush that you're using. And there's a lot of gasket material that it gets stuck on in just the right way. A regular brush just wasn't going to cut it. And you can go in there with this, and it takes time, but chip away at that gasket, get that completely out of there, and you're good to go. So these can be just fairly inexpensive tools. They wear out, they break, you forget one, whatever. It's not that big a deal. You can just go pick up another one. Having a set of files is also important, okay? Whether this is servicing starter contact pads, we've had those conversations about my opinions there, or whether it's sometimes things happen and things get hit in the wrong way, especially when you've got flanges broken apart, and that flange needs a tight seal, and now there's a big divot in the side of that housing right there at the flange surface that is going to impact the compressor's ability to seal that back together, okay? Then this is where a file could really come in handy, because then where that raised surface is, it's going to kind of push that housing apart some. You can just file it down a little bit. These are things to be very gentle with, but you can file that back down, and get it to where your mating surfaces for your flange and your gasket are really clean and smooth. There's no raised edges that's going to get in your way. So again, just things to think about. Having a good file kit is going to be really handy. I personally just don't invest in really expensive ones. I get just cheap basic ones from Home Depot. I now buy usually a kit at a time, strictly because they break, they wear out, they get lost. Somebody borrows one, and I never see it again. Stuff like that. I've personally, my experience, I've never saw the benefit of a really expensive set of those. So I've just chosen to save my money there. Granted, I have to buy a kit more frequently, so like there's always a trade-off. Maybe a more expensive set would last me a lot longer than they do. Maybe. Most of the time, I don't get to wear them out before something happens to them. So just anyway, C-clamps is going to be a really good one to have. Here's one of my old busted ones, but having some C-clamps, these don't need to be large or crazy or big or anything else of that nature. I recommend having them in general. These can be really handy when you're trying to put things together. Sometimes we do some welding and trying to put or repair things, even if temporary. These C-clamps can help with that. Or if we're trying to pull a flange surface up together, again, a C-clamp can help do that. So if you had a couple of flanges that were just really not wanting to work with you, you can thread this clamp out, put it between there, and you can kind of pull those surfaces together a little bit better to get it to where then you can work it like you need to. So it just different scenarios you'll run into. It's a really useful just tool to have. Really, really recommend a C-clamp. Large impacts. So these are such a nice tool to have. They will save a lot of trouble with really just uncooperative bolts. Okay, highly recommend. Again, I'm a DeWalt. Used DeWalt for 20 years. I don't really care the brand. If you want to use Milwaukee, Milwaukee's got their own version of these. Have at it. That's not what's important here. Fantastic. Okay, these. I cannot say enough good stuff about this kind of investment. These are investments worth making that are going to save you a lot. And then having an angle grinder. Angle grinders are really useful, really important. Whether you have a grinding blade, a cutting blade, or a wire wheel, either direction you need to go with it. The cordless ones are great. They're really efficient. I've had really good results with my DeWalt version there. Yeah, highly recommend it. That also includes so this could go even further, right? I've got sawzalls or reciprocating saws. There we go. I've got band saws, all of it in DeWalt. There's several versions. I even carry a circular saw for cutting lumber and stuff for whenever we're trying to do different rigging and things. So having those kind of tools is really helpful, and just building out that kit. I wouldn't say those others are absolutely necessary. You could argue grinder versus reciprocating saw. That's a pretty tight argument there, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd say most of the time, though, looking at it you're coming from a heavy or a light commercial residential type, you probably already have a reciprocating, and I'm making that assumption. And you may not have an angle grinder. So part of my goal here is just to say an angle grinder is a really good next investment. And I personally use my angle grinder just as much, if not more, than in the chiller side than I use my reciprocating saw, just to kind of paint a picture as to how versatile and how useful of a tool it can be. For me, ball peen hammers were actually a very useful thing. This is the same ball peen I've had since I was in trade school. It's wore the heck out. It's a very small one, so you might want a larger one as well. But just having this small little hammer with the ball peen arrangement, you can get a really fine pinpoint. It's just useful tool. Okay, that's my point. It's a useful mechanical tool. If not everybody carries something like that in their tool loadout, but I do recommend it. And I've had really good results. Having pipe wrenches. Okay. I personally recommend having a set of 18-inch and 24-inch pipe wrenches. Now, you may have a smaller set of 12s. I know a lot of guys, that was pretty common, a 12-inch or even 18. But at least if you're going to get into the chiller work and have a set of 24-inch at minimum. They also make 36-inch pipe wrenches as well. I've got a pair of them. So one thing with pipe wrenches, if you're going to have one, have two. All right. My recommendation as a starting point is get a set of 24s and get a set of 18s. You're going to use them a lot, whether it be for refrigerant pipes, whether it be for especially water pipe. You know, that's probably the most obvious there. And if you depending on the size of EXV you're working on, you got to be really careful with this. But even I've had to use these at times when I had really large EXV heads that I was trying to do a change out on. I couldn't get my crescent wrenches and stuff to work. And I have a 12-inch crescent wrench. They do make them bigger than this as well. So 12 to 24-inch crescent wrenches, well, I say 24. Pretty sure they make 24s. Anyway, having a large set of crescent wrenches, that was on my list of things to recommend. But we get into stuff sometimes that these just don't work. And so having a large set of pipe wrenches can be really useful there, and breaking those heads loose so that we can then rethread the new one on and get the repair done. Now, to keep rolling here, we've got our pullers. Okay, so there's going to be some pullers you're going to need. This particular set is my bearing pullers. So this is a bearing puller. Your shaft would sit through here. It's going to cup the bearing on this side. You pull it off. Pretty straightforward. I made some of my own extensions for these that didn't come with the kit originally. You can do that as you see fit. This is a 2-size kit personally that I carry, so I've got a smaller size and then I've got a larger, and they make them much larger than this, so it just depends on what you're working on, how big you're going to have to go. There's been some cases where I've manufactured my own puller set just because of what our circumstances were at the time and where the motor was and how big things were. And instead of going out and spending, hundreds of dollars or thousands in some cases on a professional kit, I ended up just taking some scrap metal and building the kit that I needed. So just things to think about again, depending on your company's safety regulations and the job site you're working at, there's a lot of places that won't fly. So don't think you can just do that willy-nilly. You have to think about what the circumstances are and if that's even going to be okay for you. Having a set of claw pullers. So these are critical. So I've got a bag dedicated just for these as well. So if I'm needing, you can use these for pulling bearings, even though it's not my preference. I don't really care to use these on bearings as much. These are great. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't care to use them on, say, motor bearings as much, even though I've had to do it plenty. Doing shaft bearings for like a tower fan or a sheave or anything of that nature, these pullers are really, really useful. Having a set of claw pullers. Okay. I've got 4 different sizes I carry, from little bitty small ones up to some pretty large ones. I forget the actual size, whether it's 12-inch or 14 or something like that. Anyway, a good set of claw pullers going to be an essential part of your kit. A good set of Allen wrenches. Now, I talked about this in the hand tools lesson, but I'm going to reiterate, having a good set of T-handle wrenches I think is essential, in addition to just regular right angle Allen wrenches or hex head wrenches. But either way, just reiterating, these are really important. We run into them frequently. Really good to have with you. So I've talked about the sockets really heavy. I also want to just hit on the actual wrenches themselves. Have the same wrench sets, just a regular open-end, non-adjustable. This is fixed, just an open-end wrench with a closed end. Have your sets of these as well. Have those as part of your kit. Match your socket sizes, okay? Try not to rely on a open-end adjustable or a crescent wrench any more than you have to. While these are great and they're really versatile and useful, with a lot of the stuff we get into, we need to make sure that we have proper wrenches that we can put on there. Now, keep in mind, these closed ends come very similar to the sockets where we can have a 12-point or a 6-point. So in the beginning, at a bare minimum, I don't think it's a big deal if you want to first invest in a 12-point set, okay, just to get you something. But long term, I highly recommend getting the 6 point. That way, I've rounded a lot of freaking nuts with these 12 points. I'm telling you. So just you got to be careful going with a 12-point set and where and how you use it. That's why it is worth the investment to get a 6 point if at all possible. Some additional tools to discuss. Skid plates. I referenced these earlier. Skid plates are really good if we're moving really heavy motors, large compressors, things of that nature. And what a skid plate can do is lots of times our motors or our compressors may be up on a set of feet, and there's also a lip to the edge of our machine that we're needing to slide over. So if we can prop up a metal plate that motor can then slide onto and then slide through to be able to get out safely and work on it, then that's going to be a really effective and safe and easier way of going about it versus some other methods that I've tried in the past that didn't work out so well. So to get a skid plate, and you can just choose your size, say whether it be a 24 by 24 or a 24 by 36 in size, something along those lines at a starting point at least. And even having a couple of them can be useful. And I would say that at a minimum, we usually make them about 1/4 inch. Find a metal shop, somebody that is a metal supplier or a welding supplier possibly close to you. A lot of the metal shops I've worked with also supplied welding stuff, right? So whether it be they have some scrap in the back, just some random pieces, or whether you buy a smaller piece, if they let you do that to begin with, just you can work with them on getting a plate and just explain to them, be upfront, like, hey, I do commercial chiller service work, da da da. I'm just needing a plate like this. That's all I'm trying to look for. I don't need the whole piece, because most of the time that's what they try to sell is the whole sheet. So just explain to the counter guys what you're trying to do and what you're needing, and then see just what they have. And if they have something, or maybe they keep an eye out for something, like, hey, we have pieces like that on routinely. We don't have any right now. Come back or call us in a week, or do this, do that, and they may work with you. That's how I've gotten a lot of mine. So, and sometimes they'll give it to you for free because it's scrap. Sometimes they'll just have you pay a simple gross weight dollar value, per pound, and you just take that and go. So, if you can get these in aluminum, it's handy. I would recommend going a little bit thicker with the aluminum plate, just because aluminum doesn't have the same rigidity as steel. But aluminum is nice because it's a lot lighter of a plate to be able to move and do stuff. One of the issues I have with aluminum is the motor feet or the compressor feet will tend to dig into it more. So if you're trying to slide, it's going to be harder to get that sliding action on aluminum versus if it was steel and it was a steel to steel footer, that steel is going to slide on steel a little bit better. Okay, just things to think about. Yeah, skid plates. Skid plates are really, really useful. Also, having a good set of sledgehammers, having a 1 pound, 3 pound, and a 5 pound sledge as a combo, or just at least get a 3 pound sledge at a minimum. Okay, that's going to be a really good. Just sometimes you gotta move things along. All right, you need something to move, and your regular hammers won't cut it. Mallets aren't quite cutting it, and you just need to give a little more persuasion to the situation. Good sledgehammer is going to help you do that, which we have to do more often than you'd probably think. And then the final thing I'm going to recommend is a set of jacks. Now, whether that be a set of bottle jacks, a set of scissor jacks, a set of automotive jacks for a car, or a floor jack, basically. Have a set of jacks, okay? As part of your mechanic. Can't tell you how many times I've needed to pull a set of jacks, and I say a set meaning you may get away with just one depending on your circumstances, but there's been lots of times I needed 2 and 3 and 4 jacks kind of positioned in different spots to hold everything up and to move it and to get it all in alignment so I could cinch it up together or get it out, either or. So I'd highly recommend a set of jacks to be able to do that. Now, my personal preference is, say, a floor jack or a scissor jack. Now, scissor jacks you have to be extremely careful with depending on their rating, because I've had a lot of them collapse on me, and it can be really freaking dangerous at that point. So be very cautious with scissor jacks. My issue with bottle jacks is because they're so tall they don't always fit where I need them to. And that's where a floor jack comes in clutch, because it can actually get into where I need it to be so that it does the job I expect it to. So just something to think about and be aware of is have a set of jacks that you can lift and pick things up with to be able to work and just do the job you need to effectively. In terms of just mechanical tools, this is not everything in the book that you're going to need throughout your career. Torque wrenches. Ooh, I almost forgot that one. Have a set of torque wrenches, please. Especially if you're going to get into like internal work on compressors, and if you're going to even try to even think about doing any kind of shaft seal work, overhaul work, anything like that for a centrifugal, have torque wrenches. These things require very specific torque values, and you will not be successful without a torque wrench. I will tell you that now. And with your torque wrenches, you're going to need a set in inch pound and a set in foot pound. I'm not going to get into the tolerances because they really kind of depends on the compressor and the size, but just bear that in mind. Have 2 sets, and have a set for foot, have a set for inch pound in your torque values. Now, I know that some manufacturers, especially for like the mini split ones, they have these open-end adjustable wrench style, and then you can put a basically like a fitting or an attachment to go to a socket or something like that, and you still have the open-end adjustable piece. As a entry-level beginner, that's probably fine. I've used those. I've never owned one, but I've worked with guys who had them. They are useful, but that's an entry-level wrench. Okay, so if you're going to start getting into higher-level things, if your company doesn't supply it, then you're going to want to invest in a proper square drive. Typically, I would say your inch pounds are going to be like a quarter inch. And then my foot pounds were usually a 3/8 socket head or a drive head. Work that out for yourself on what makes sense. They also make them a 1/2 inch drive, and then make them in the various drive sizes. So you just look at what you're needing, look at the torque specs of whatever it is you're trying to service, and then get the best thing you can within those tolerances to do the job. So yeah, torque wrenches. So again, this is not everything in the book that you're going to need. This is a really strong starting point. If you can just even get a portion of what is on this table, really you probably should have all of this as a bare minimum. But if you can just get a portion of this, this will help you get started. And then like I talked about in the hands tool lesson, focus on what is in your way daily, okay? If you've got certain tools that you're realizing that, hey, on a daily basis, that would really help me, focus on those tools first. Then start investing in other stuff that you're going to use less often, but you still have a need for. The more you can invest in your tools and know what tools to have and what to do with them, the more your value as a technician increases. And because it also means that the more you can be sent out on and work on yourself, it's the more repairs you can make as an individual. So just bear that in mind, that your tool loadout does correlate to a degree to your actual skill level and what your employer can send you to do, what your service shop is capable of using you for. So if you don't have the adequate tools, they're not going to be able to send you on a whole lot, because you're not going to be able to properly do the repair. And then in some cases, you're trying to rig something that's not meant to do that. Mechanical loadout, this is a good starting point.